In making that historic decision in 2013, which culminated in the landmark 2016 arbitral award, our nation chose dialogue over confrontation, law over intimidation, and peace over conflict.
This weekend, 14 countries, including the United States, Japan, Australia, the United Kingdom, Canada, Germany, Italy, and the Philippines, delivered a rare united message to China. On the 10th anniversary of the landmark South China Sea arbitration, they reaffirmed that the 2016 tribunal ruling remains legally binding between China and the Philippines, and that Beijing's sweeping claims based on so-called historic rights have no basis under international law. This wasn't just another diplomatic statement. It was one of the strongest coordinated international responses on the South China Sea in years. But here's what makes it remarkable. China rejected this ruling the day it was issued, and it still rejects it today. So why did 14 governments decide to defend it 10 years later? Because this is no longer simply a dispute over reefs, shoals, or fishing grounds. It's become a test of something much bigger. Can international law still influence the actions of major powers? Or will the future of the South China Sea ultimately be decided by whoever can maintain the strongest presence at sea? That's exactly what we'll uncover in this video. So, what exactly happened? On July 11, 2026, just one day before the 10th anniversary of the South China Sea arbitration, 14 governments issued a coordinated joint statement reaffirming their support for the landmark 2016 tribunal ruling. Their message was straightforward. They reaffirmed that the tribunal's decision remains legally binding between China and the Philippines, and that China's claims based on so-called historic rights have no legal foundation under international law. But the statement went further. It condemned coercive actions at sea, including the use of Coast Guard vessels, maritime militia, and other tactics to obstruct the lawful activities of neighboring states. It also reaffirmed support for UNCLOS, stressing that maritime disputes should be resolved peacefully and that freedom of navigation remains essential to regional and global security. One point is especially important. This was not a new court ruling. No new arbitration had taken place, and no new judgment had been issued. Instead, the 14 countries were sending a political and diplomatic message. The legal authority of the 2016 ruling has not changed simply because China continues to reject it. That naturally raises the next question. Why did a decision issued 10 years ago become one of the most consequential legal rulings in modern maritime history? To understand why 14 countries are still defending the 2016 ruling today, we have to go back to the moment this dispute changed forever. It didn't begin in a courtroom. It began at sea. In 2012, Chinese and Philippine vessels became locked in a tense standoff at Scarborough Shoal, a rich fishing ground located within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. After weeks of confrontation, China established effective control over the area, and Filipino fishermen gradually lost access to waters they had relied on for generations. For Manila, the message was clear. The dispute could no longer be managed the old way. Instead of responding with military force, the Philippines made a decision that would reshape the South China Sea debate for years to come. In January 2013, it brought the dispute before an international tribunal under UNCLOS. But here's what's often misunderstood. The Philippines wasn't asking the tribunal to decide who owned the islands. It was asking a different question. Were China's maritime claims consistent with international law? China rejected the arbitration from the very beginning, arguing that the tribunal had no jurisdiction and refusing to participate. Even so, the proceedings continued under the rules of UNCLOS. More than 3 years later, the tribunal delivered a unanimous ruling. It concluded that China's claims based on so-called historic rights had no legal basis where they exceeded the maritime rights established under UNCLOS. The tribunal also found that several disputed features in the Spratly Islands were legally rocks or low tide elevations, not full islands, meaning they could not generate the vast maritime zones Beijing had claimed. It further ruled that China had violated the Philippines' sovereign rights by interfering with fishing, restricting energy exploration, and limiting access to Scarborough Shoal. But one point is just as important. The tribunal never decided who owns the islands. It clarified what maritime rights those features can legally generate under international law. That distinction is why the ruling still matters today. It didn't end the South China Sea dispute. It changed the rules under which the dispute would be argued and contested for years to come. So, if China rejected the ruling 10 years ago, why are 14 countries, and separately, the European Union, still defending it? Because this is no longer just about China and the Philippines. It's about protecting the rules that govern the world's oceans. The countries behind the joint statement know they are unlikely to change Beijing's position overnight. Instead, they are reinforcing a different message. An international ruling doesn't lose its authority simply because one country refuses to accept it. That matters far beyond Southeast Asia. Nearly one-third of global maritime trade passes through the South China Sea. Stable shipping lanes, freedom of navigation, and predictable international rules are vital for economies around the world. That's why countries from North America, Europe, and the Indo-Pacific all chose to speak with one voice. For them, this isn't just about one legal case. It's about defending the rules-based maritime order before it begins to erode. But while much of the international community continues to support the ruling, China has remained just as firm in rejecting it. So why has Beijing refused to change its position after an entire decade? So why has China refused to accept the ruling for an entire decade? The simple answer is that Beijing rejects both the ruling and the process that produced it. China argues that the dispute is fundamentally about territorial sovereignty, not just maritime rights, and therefore should be resolved through direct negotiations, not international arbitration. That's why Beijing has consistently described the 2016 award as null and void, and says it neither accepts nor recognizes the tribunal's decision. But there's a bigger reason. For China's leadership, this is about far more than legal arguments. It's about national sovereignty, strategic security, and political credibility. Accepting the ruling would require Beijing to abandon positions it has defended for decades, something no Chinese government has shown any willingness to do. China also accuses the United States and its allies of using the South China Sea to contain its rise through military deployments, freedom of navigation operations, and closer security ties with rival claimants. That is why, even after 10 years of diplomatic pressure, neither side has changed its position. Instead, the competition has increasingly shifted from the courtroom to the waters of the South China Sea. So what has changed over the past decade, and why is the region becoming even more strategically contested?
On whether there can be joint development with China on our exclusive economic zone. My opinion is it's not possible because under the Constitution, there's a provision there which says that the use and enjoyment of the exclusive economic zone shall be reserved exclusively to Philippines.
If the tribunal settled the legal debate in 2016, why does the South China Sea feel even more dangerous today? Because something fundamental changed. The law stayed the same. The reality at sea did not. While diplomats debated legal principles, China was steadily changing the facts on the water. Year after year, the China Coast Guard grew larger, more capable, and more active around contested areas such as Scarborough Shoal, Second Thomas Shoal, and the Spratly Islands. Alongside it, maritime militia vessels maintained an almost constant presence, reinforcing Beijing's claims without relying solely on the People's Liberation Army Navy. China also transformed several reclaimed reefs into heavily fortified outposts, complete with long runways, deep water harbors, advanced radar systems, and logistics facilities capable of supporting sustained military and Coast Guard operations. The result was a new normal: water cannons, dangerous intercepts, military-grade lasers, close encounters between rival vessels. What were once headline-making incidents have become routine.
China Coast Guard vessel 3304. Keep your distance away from the Filipino fishing boats as you are compromising their safety and the safety of Filipino fishermen.
But China wasn't the only country adapting. For the Philippines, the tribunal delivered an important lesson. Winning the legal argument didn't mean controlling the waters. So Manila changed its strategy. It accelerated military modernization, strengthened maritime surveillance, expanded coastal defenses, and deepened security cooperation with the United States, Japan, and Australia. Joint patrols became more frequent. Military exercises grew larger. Intelligence sharing became closer than ever before. By 2026, the South China Sea looked very different from the one the tribunal had ruled on a decade earlier. 10 years ago, the battle was fought in a courtroom. Today, it's unfolding every single day at sea. The legal positions haven't changed. The balance of power has. And that's why the South China Sea is no longer just a legal dispute. It's become a long-term contest of presence, persistence, partnerships, and power. The next question is no longer who has the stronger legal argument. It's whether this growing competition can remain below the threshold of conflict, or whether one miscalculation could change the Indo-Pacific forever. At first glance, this may look like a dispute over a few reefs and shoals in Southeast Asia. It's not. The South China Sea is one of the world's busiest and most strategically important waterways. Nearly one-third of global maritime trade passes through these waters every year, connecting Asia with Europe, the Middle East, and North America. That means what happens here doesn't stay here. Oil, natural gas, consumer goods, automobiles, and countless other products travel through the South China Sea every day. A major disruption would ripple across the global economy, driving up shipping costs, disrupting supply chains, and ultimately affecting consumers around the world. These sea lanes are also critical for the global technology industry. Advanced semiconductors produced across East Asia pass through this region before reaching manufacturers worldwide, making the security of these waters increasingly important in the age of artificial intelligence and advanced computing. But commerce is only part of the story. For the United States and its allies, the South China Sea is a vital military corridor linking the Pacific and Indian Oceans. For China, it is equally critical to its national security and its ability to project power beyond its coastline. That's why this dispute attracts attention far beyond Southeast Asia. This isn't simply a contest over territory. It's a contest over one of the world's most important strategic crossroads, where trade, technology, energy, and military power all converge. And that's exactly why 14 countries, along with the European Union, chose to reaffirm the 2016 ruling. The bigger question now is no longer why the world is watching. It's where this growing strategic competition goes next. After everything we've covered, one question remains. If the tribunal's ruling was legally binding, why hasn't it settled the dispute? Because a legal victory and a strategic victory aren't always the same thing. In 2016, the tribunal delivered a clear legal judgment. It rejected China's claims based on so-called historic rights and clarified how international law applies to the South China Sea. But that wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a different contest. International law can define rights. It cannot enforce them on its own. Unlike national courts, there is no global authority that can compel countries to follow tribunal decisions. Their influence depends on diplomacy, international support, and the willingness of states to respect the rules. At sea, however, another reality takes over. Presence matters. the ships that patrol contested waters, the coast guards that remain on station, the infrastructure built on disputed features, the partnerships that strengthen deterrence. Over the past decade, that's exactly what we've seen. The Philippines has continued to rely on the tribunal's ruling as the legal foundation for its position, while China has continued to reinforce its presence through Coast Guard patrols, maritime militia vessels, and military infrastructure. That's also why the recent joint statement matters. It wasn't intended to force China to change course overnight. It was intended to show that 10 years later, the international community still considers the 2016 ruling the legal benchmark for interpreting maritime rights in the South China Sea. Whether that legal consensus will eventually influence events at sea remains uncertain. But one thing is already clear. The South China Sea is no longer just a dispute over territory. It's a long-term contest between legal principles and strategic realities. How that balance evolves may shape not only the future of the South China Sea, but the future of the wider Indo-Pacific. After everything we've discussed, one final question remains. Can a joint diplomatic statement actually change what happens in the South China Sea? The answer is yes, but only to a point. Its greatest strength isn't military or economic. It's political. By standing behind the 2016 ruling, the 14 countries, and separately, the European Union, reinforce the international consensus that the tribunal remains the legal benchmark for interpreting maritime rights in the South China Sea. That strengthens the Philippines' diplomatic position and signals that many governments still support a rules-based approach to resolving maritime disputes. But it's equally important to understand what this statement cannot do. It cannot force China to accept the ruling. It cannot remove military outposts or Coast Guard vessels from disputed waters. And it cannot eliminate the risk of future confrontations at sea. That's why this statement shouldn't be judged by whether it changes China's behavior tomorrow. Its real significance is that it keeps the legal framework alive, reinforces international support for it, and reminds the world that the debate over the South China Sea is far from over. Whether that diplomatic consensus can eventually shape events on the water remains one of the biggest strategic questions facing the Indo-Pacific. Ten years after the landmark tribunal ruling, one thing is clear. The legal debate has largely stood still. The strategic competition has not. The most likely future isn't an all-out war. It's a continuation of the gray zone competition we've seen over the past decade. More Coast Guard patrols, more maritime militia activity, more close encounters at sea, and more diplomatic confrontations that stop just short of open conflict. At the same time, the United States, Japan, Australia, and other partners are expected to deepen military cooperation with regional allies through joint patrols, exercises, and expanded security partnerships, all aimed at strengthening deterrence and maintaining stability. Diplomacy will continue as well. ASEAN's long-running efforts to negotiate a code of conduct could help reduce tensions, but deep political and strategic differences mean meaningful progress is likely to be slow. The greatest danger, however, isn't necessarily a deliberate decision to start a conflict. It's a miscalculation. When coast guards, naval ships, military aircraft, and fishing fleets operate in such close proximity, a single collision, a misunderstood maneuver, or one unexpected incident could trigger a much larger crisis. History has shown that some of the world's biggest confrontations didn't begin with carefully planned decisions. They began with a single mistake. That's why governments across the Indo-Pacific continue to invest not only in stronger deterrence, but also in crisis communication and military-to-military dialogue. Because preventing a conflict may prove just as important as preparing for one. At first glance, this was a story about a 10-year-old legal ruling. But in reality, it's about something much bigger. The anniversary statement wasn't expected to change China's position overnight. Its purpose was to remind the world that international law still matters, even when it's challenged. 10 years after the tribunal's decision, the legal debate may be largely settled. The strategic competition is not. The future of the South China Sea will ultimately be shaped not only by military power, but also by diplomacy, restraint, and the choices made by every country involved. And those choices won't just determine the future of the South China Sea, they could shape the future of the entire Indo-Pacific.